I've been to hundreds of weddings, but this one felt like a performance polished to a high gloss, then set under chandeliers so bright they made the champagne glitter. From my table I could see Adrian Cole, black tuxedo, perfect posture, laughing with a group of executives near the head table. He didn't belong to this wedding, not really. He belonged to the corporate world that had paid for half of it. He was here because the groom was his business partner, not because love moved him. I'd known Adrian long enough to recognize the look in his eyes when he wanted to disappear. It came over him suddenly, like a shutter closing. Tonight I saw it just before he excused himself from the table and slipped toward the glass doors that led to the courtyard. I followed with my gaze, not my feet. A wedding planner doesn't abandon her post, but when I glanced toward the fountain outside, my breath caught. A small boy, no more than 6, sat on the stone ledge, shoulders shaking. His little hands rubbed at his eyes, smearing tears into streaks on flushed cheeks. I couldn't hear his sobs over the music, but I could feel them, the way you feel the bass of a drum through the floor. Adrian slowed, watching him. Something in his posture softened, the way a man does when he steps into unfamiliar territory. He crouched beside the boy. "Hey," I saw him say, his voice gentle now. "What sip's wrong, buddy?" The boy sniffled, keeping his head down. If this story resonated with you, subscribe to the channel and like, spread the word, and tell us where you're watching from. Did something happen? Adrian tried again. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a neatly folded white handkerchief, the kind men like him still carried, and held it out. The boy took it but didn't look at him. Instead, his gaze flicked upward just for a second, and I saw it, the same hazel eyes as Adrian's. That subtle green fleck brown you couldn't forget once you'd noticed it. Adrian's head tilted, as if some buried instinct had just been unearthed. "You here with your parents?" he asked quietly. The boy Sip's voice was hoarse. "Just my mom." Adrian glanced around the courtyard, scanning the clusters of wedding guests through the tall glass windows. No one was looking for the child. No one even seemed to notice he was gone. He shifted closer, not in the imposing way men sometimes do, but with a carefulness I hadn't seen from him before. "What's Sep's your name?" The boy hesitated. "Daniel." "That Sip's a strong name," Adrian said, his smile almost real now. "You want to tell me why you Sips are out here all alone?" Daniel's small fingers twisted the fabric of the handkerchief. "It's too loud in there." His voice was so soft I barely caught it through the glass. Adrian chuckled, lightly. "Yeah, it can be. You want me to sit with you for a minute?" The boy gave a small nod, and Adrian eased himself onto the fountain's edge. They sat there like that, an unlikely pairing of a millionaire CEO in a tailored tux and a child with scuffed shoes and a slightly crooked tie. From my table I could see something in Adrian shifting. He wasn't performing anymore. This was different. "You know," Adrian said after a beat, "when I was your age, I hated big parties too. My parents used to drag me to these fancy events, and I set sneak out to find someplace quiet." Daniel looked up at him for the first time, curiosity flickering in those hazel eyes. "Did they get mad?" "Sometimes," Adrian admitted with a small smile. "But the good ones, they said come find me." Daniel's expression softened. His legs swung gently over the edge of the fountain, shoes brushing against the stone. "I don't know how long they would stayed there, speaking in those low, careful tones. But then, Daniel?" The voice cut through the courtyard like glass breaking. I saw Adrian Sip's back stiffen instantly. "Daniel?" The voice came again, clearer, closer now. And then she appeared. A woman in a deep emerald dress stepped out from the ballroom, framed in the glow of the chandeliers behind her. Her dark hair was swept back in a style that was both effortless and precise. Her posture was straight, commanding, but it was her face that stopped me cold. Because I knew that face. Adrian did too. His eyes widened, not in the polite surprise you give an old acquaintance, but in the way a man looks when the ground under him shifts. "Elena," he breathed, so quietly I doubted the boy heard it. She didn't greet him. Her gaze went straight to Daniel. In 2 strides she was beside him, her hand resting protectively on his small shoulder. "I told you not to wander off," she said softly to the boy, but there was an undercurrent of urgency in her tone. Daniel glanced at Adrian, then back to her. "I wasn't set wandering, he was talking to me." Elena's eyes finally met Adrian's, and in that brief, silent exchange, 1,000 unspoken words passed between them. Anger, history, maybe even fear. Adrian opened his mouth. "Is he—" "Not here," she cut in sharply. Her voice was still low, but the steel in it was unmistakable. She took Daniel's hand and began to guide him back toward the ballroom. Adrian stood watching her go, his expression unreadable except for one thing. The shutter in his eyes was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous: recognition. And as the music swelled again inside, I realized this wedding was about to become anything but ordinary. For a moment the courtyard froze, 3 figures suspended in a silent triangle of past and present. Adrian was the first to speak. Elena. Her name left his lips like it had been locked away for years, and suddenly freed, brittle and unsteady. She didn't answer. She didn't even flinch. She simply tightened her hand on the boy's shoulder, her polished nails resting like a shield across the small fabric of his suit jacket. I'd only seen Elena once before, years ago in a hallway thick with whispers after a charity gala gone wrong. Back then she was all laughter and bare-shouldered youth, the kind of woman people turned their heads for without knowing why. Now she looked different, sharper, like life had filed her edges into weapons. "What are you doing here?" Adrian's voice was low, controlled, but I heard the slight hitch, his breath catching on the last word. "I'm attending a wedding," she replied evenly, as though the answer should be obvious. "With Daniel," Adrian said, glancing down at the boy. "Your son." "Our son," she corrected softly, the words sliding between them like a blade. Adrian blinked, just once, but his eyes didn't leave her face. "You didn't tell me. You didn't stay." The exchange was quiet, but it was enough to pull me closer, drawn by the gravity of 2 people who had been planets in the same orbit once, and now were colliding. Adrian took a small step forward, but Elena shifted Daniel behind her. The boy clung to the edge of her dress, looking between them with the wary curiosity children have, when they sense they're standing in the middle of something too big for them to understand. "I searched for you," Adrian said, and for the first time his voice cracked. "After everything, I tried." "No," Elena said, her gaze locked on his. "You looked for a way to save yourself, not for me." I could see the muscles in Adrian's jaw tighten, a flash of something: regret, anger, passing through his expression. "Elena, She cut him off. "Not here, not in front of him." Adrian's eyes darted back to Daniel. The resemblance was undeniable now, the same slope of the nose, the faint curl in the hair when the light hit it right. "How old is he?" Adrian asked, his voice quieter now. "Old enough to not need anything from you," Elena replied. The boy looked up at her. "Mom?" His voice was hesitant. She softened instantly, crouching down so they were eye level. That's okay, sweetheart. We sat just talking." Daniel Sip's gaze drifted back to Adrian, studying him the way children study strangers who feel familiar. "Do you know my mom?" Adrian inhaled slowly, like the question carried the weight of years. "Yes," he said finally. "A long time ago." Elena rose again, every inch of her posture radiating control. "We should go." "Wait," Adrian said. His hand lifted slightly before dropping again. "Elena, you can sit, just walk away." "Not this time." Her laugh was short, bitter. "Not this time?" "Adrian, every time was this time. You walked away first. I just learned to keep walking." The music from inside swelled as the ballroom doors opened briefly, spilling a few guests into the courtyard. Laughter drifted out, oblivious to the small war being waged a few steps away. Adrian lowered his voice. "You disappeared. No calls, no letters." "You made it very clear I wasn't set welcome," she said sharply. "And when the scandal broke, when they printed my name next to yours in every paper in the city, you stood in front of cameras and denied me." "That was to protect you," he said. Her eyes narrowed. You mean to protect your career, your company, your precious image? I was disposable, Adrian, and pregnant. You think I forgot? Silence fell between them, heavy and unmovable. Daniel shifted, tugging at Elena Sip's hand. Mom, can we go back inside? She glanced at him, her face softening again. In a minute, honey. Adrian Sip's gaze lingered on the boy. He doesn't know, does he? Her lips pressed into a thin line. What good would it do? He has a life. He sits happy. He doesn't need a stranger showing up with apologies and bank accounts. I'm not a stranger, Adrian said, a flash of desperation breaking through the polished CEO exterior. Elena stepped closer then, not enough to be intimate, but enough for him to hear her clearly over the hum of the fountain. You are to him, and that Sip's your fault, not mine. For a moment, neither of them moved. The wind lifted the edge of Elena's hair, brushing it across her cheek. Adrian's eyes followed the motion, lingering as if he was remembering another time, another place. Then she straightened. Enjoy the wedding, Adrian. I'm sure you still make quite the toast. She turned, guiding Daniel toward the ballroom. The boy glanced back once, meeting Adrian's gaze before disappearing through the glass doors. Adrian stayed rooted to the spot, his eyes fixed on where they had stood. The fountain kept trickling behind him, indifferent to the history that had just been dragged into the light. From where I stood, I could see it. The moment he realized the past hadn't stayed buried, it had walked right back into his life, holding the hand of a boy who might be his son. And judging by the look on Elena's face, this was only the beginning. The ballroom glowed in soft gold, the chandeliers casting halos across polished silverware and crystal glasses. The kind of place where conversations sounded like wealth, low laughter, clinking wine, carefully measured words. But Adrian wasn't listening to any of it. From my vantage point at the planner's table, I saw where his gaze kept landing 3 tables over, where Elena sat with her back straight, chin lifted, one hand resting lightly on her wineglass. She wasn't laughing, not in the bright, shallow way the other women around her were. When she smiled, it was the kind of smile that belonged to someone who knew exactly where she stood, and exactly who was watching. Daniel was seated beside her, poking at a plate of pasta he clearly didn't want. Every so often she would lean toward him, murmur something that made his frown ease, and then return to surveying the room with those sharp, assessing eyes. Adrian's fork hadn't touched his plate in 20 minutes. Adrian, Sophie murmured from his right. They said we're waiting for you to give the toast. He didn't answer right away. His eyes lingered on Elena as she reached for her water glass, her movements precise, unhurried, like a woman who had spent years teaching herself never to be rushed by anyone. Sophie followed his gaze, her hand tightening slightly on her champagne flute. Who is she? Adrian blinked, finally looking away. No one. That didn't look like no one, Sophie said flatly. I saw the faintest flicker of irritation cross his face, but he smoothed it over with the ease of a man who been navigating high-stakes rooms his entire life. She Sip's an old acquaintance. Sophie Sip's eyes narrowed. Acquaintance or problem? Adrian didn't answer, but the pause was enough. Half an hour later, after the toast and the polite applause, I saw him slip away from the table again. This time not toward the courtyard, but toward the bar where one of the groomsmen was talking too loudly about the lawyer in green. Heard she sits in town for the Harlan case, the groomsman was saying. You know, the whistleblower thing? Big corporate fraud, millions at stake. They say she sits already gutted 2 companies like fish. Adrian Sip's steps slowed. Another voice chimed in. Yeah, Elena Torres. Criminal defense and corporate litigation. Apparently she Sip's a nightmare. If you Sippers on the wrong side of her, doesn't Sip care who you are. She Sip'd burn the whole building down if it means winning. Adrian Sip's fingers curled slightly at his side. You Sips her, sure that Sips her. The groomsman turned, startled to find him standing there. No reason, Adrian said, though his voice was quieter now. He moved back toward his table, but his focus never returned to the people around him. His mind was elsewhere. I could see it in the way his jaw clenched when Elena leaned in to speak with a man 2 seats down from her, in the way his grip tightened on his glass when she laughed at something Daniel whispered to her. Sophie leaned in again. "You've been staring at her all night. If there's something I should know—" "There's nothing you should know," Adrian interrupted, a little too sharply. But I saw the truth in his expression. This wasn't the look of a man curious about a stranger. This was recognition sharpened into suspicion. After dessert, when the band began playing something slow and half the guests drifted to the dance floor, Adrian didn't move. He sat there, watching Elena like she was a piece on a chessboard he hadn't accounted for, and every possible move she could make might topple the game. Eventually she glanced up and caught him looking. The eye contact was brief but loaded, like a silent acknowledgement. "I know you're watching. I came here for a reason." Daniel tugged at her arm, asking for something, and she rose, guiding him toward the exit. But just before she disappeared into the hallway, she looked over her shoulder. Not at the crowd, not at the couple dancing closest to her, at Adrian. And the smallest curve of her lips said everything. It wasn't a smile of greeting. It was a smile of warning. The first time I saw Adrian lose composure, it wasn't during a shareholder crisis or a hostile takeover. It was the morning after the wedding. I was in the lobby of the Langford Hotel, clipboard in hand, wrapping up post-event logistics. Adrian came through the revolving doors in a charcoal suit, phone pressed to his ear. He didn't notice me. He was moving too fast. Jaw tight, eyes fixed straight ahead. "Tell me that's not true," he was saying, his voice low but sharp enough to cut. Whoever was on the other end didn't answer the way he wanted. His pace slowed, his expression darkened. "Her name is Elena Torres." "Yes, that Elena. And you telling me she lead counsel." He stopped near the elevator bank, one hand braced against the marble column. "When did we find this out? And why the hell wasn't I told sooner?" The elevator dinged. He stepped inside, still speaking. "I don't care if it sets the weekend. Get everyone in the office. I want a war room set up by noon." The doors closed, cutting him off. By the time I delivered the last vendor payment, the whispers had started. The Harlan case. The whistleblower. A 7-figure fraud investigation aimed squarely at coal industries. And Elena Torres was at the center of it. That afternoon, Adrian's office felt different, tense, charged. The skyline view was the same, but the air carried the weight of a storm rolling in. His executive team sat around the long glass conference table, folders open, coffee cooling in untouched cups. Let's go over it again," Adrian said, pacing. "What exactly is she claiming?" His general counsel, a nervous man named Whitmore, cleared his throat. "Our former accounts director, Harlan, is alleging that coal industries falsified financial statements to inflate stock value and mislead investors. Torres is representing him in a federal suit." Adrian stopped pacing. And she filed a motion to unseal internal communications from the last 5 years," Whitmore said. "If the judge approves it, she'll have access to everything. Emails, memos, text messages." "She wants get it," Adrian said flatly. Whitmore shifted in his chair. "Sir, she has a reputation for getting it." That drew a ripple of uneasy glances around the table. "What do we know about her strategy?" Adrian asked. "She building the case as a corporate accountability narrative," Whitmore replied, "framing Harlan as the insider who risked everything to stop systemic fraud. If she can prove her timeline, the penalties could include prison time." The room went still. Prison. I saw something flicker in Adrian's eyes then. Not just fear, but something more personal. "She knows me," he said finally, almost to himself. "She knows exactly where to hit." After the meeting, I lingered by the reception desk as his assistant. Marla leaned in close to another staffer. "Apparently he knew her years ago," Marla whispered. "Before the company went public. Some history. And now she sits back with a case that could bury him." "Think it sets personal?" the staffer asked. Marla smirked. "With a lawyer like that, everything's personal." By the end of the day, Adrian had a dossier on his desk, thick, tabbed, meticulously compiled. It detailed every case Elena had taken in the last decade. She didn't just win, she obliterated. Multinational chemical company? Settled for triple damages after she produced internal lab reports they swore didn't exist. Real estate conglomerate? Public apology, CEO resignation, and a payout so massive the shareholders revolted. And now she was aiming at him. That evening I found myself in the hotel bar, not by accident. I'd heard Elena was meeting a client there. She walked in right on time, Daniel at her side with a backpack slung over one shoulder. She guided him to a corner table where a younger associate was already waiting with files spread out. Daniel sat quietly with a coloring book, while Elena leaned in, speaking in low, measured tones. Even here, she commanded the space. I caught fragments of her conversation as I passed. The financial audit from 2018. It sets the key. He still tried to settle. We don't take it, not yet. Jury needs to see who he really is. Her associate nodded, scribbling notes. When she glanced up, her eyes swept the room with the same precision I'd seen at the wedding, and for a fraction of a second, they landed on me. It wasn't hostility exactly. It was calculation. Later that night, Adrian called Marla from his penthouse. I know because the walls in this city are thinner than people think. I want everything on her, he said. Where she sits been the last 7 years, who she sits talked to, who she sits worked for. A pause. And the boy, Daniel, find out who his father is. Another pause. No. Don Bist asked directly, discreetly, quietly. The next morning, Adrian's driver pulled up outside a private lab on the edge of downtown. Inside, a technician in a white coat handed him a small envelope. The lab didn't ask why a billionaire CEO wanted a paternity test run on a disposable coffee cup. Money bought silence. By midweek, the envelope was on Adrian's desk. He didn't open it right away. He poured himself a drink first, stared out at the city, let the ice melt halfway. When he finally slit the paper, the result was clear in one line. Probability of paternity 99.97%. Daniel was his son. That night, Adrian didn't sleep. He sat in the dark, glass in hand, replaying every moment from the wedding. Daniel's eyes. Elena's voice when she said, "Our son." She had kept the boy from him, and now she was trying to destroy him in court. But he couldn't decide which thought hit harder, that she might succeed in taking his company, or that she might succeed in keeping his son. From my place on the periphery, I could feel the shift. The case wasn't just business anymore. It was war, and the battlefield was both the courtroom and the space between a father and the child he never knew. And in that kind of war, there are no rules. The first time I saw Elena alone with Daniel outside a courtroom, she wasn't the lawyer the press called a scalpel in heels. She was just a mother, kneeling in the hallway, tying his shoelace before sending him off with a relative. "Don't wait up for me," she told him, brushing his hair back. "I should be home late." That moment slipped away quickly, replaced by the steely, focused woman she had trained herself to be. But I kept thinking about the road between those two versions of her. Flashback, 7 years ago. A cramped apartment with a leaky kitchen tap and peeling paint on the walls. Daniel was only a few months old then, asleep in a thrift store bassinet beside the couch. Elena sat at a second-hand desk, a stack of law textbooks in front of her, highlighter in hand. Her shift at the diner had ended an hour earlier. Her next class began at dawn. Her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She stared at it until it stopped. Then she got up, checked Daniel, and went back to reading. There was no time for tears anymore. She worked nights, studied days, and learned early that exhaustion could be an ally if you let it sharpen you instead of break you. When she wasn't memorizing case law, she was learning how to stretch a single grocery bill into a week's worth of meals. When she wasn't waiting tables, she was in the library, Daniel asleep in a carrier strapped to her chest. Adrian never called. She stopped waiting. Flashback, 3 years ago. Daniel had his first fever that wouldn't break. Elena was in the middle of a clerkship interview when her sitter called in a panic. She left mid-sentence, sprinting through rain to catch the bus home. She didn't get the job. That night she sat on the kitchen floor with Daniel in her lap, cool cloth pressed to his forehead. "We shall be okay," she whispered, rocking him gently. "Shall make sure we shall are always okay." And somehow she believed it. Present day. The conference room was lit by the pale glow of late afternoon, the city skyline framed behind Elena like a backdrop for a woman who had finally claimed her place. Stacks of files covered the table, audits, memos, deposition transcripts. Her associate Mia tapped a pen against a legal pad. "Harlan Setz's testimony will set the tone," Mia said. "But the jury needs to feel the culture of corruption, not just the numbers." "They will," Elena replied. Her voice was calm, but her hands were in constant motion, flipping through binders, marking passages with colored tabs. Mia hesitated. "You know Adrian Sip's going to come after you personally, right? His team will dig into everything. Your schooling, your finances, even—" "Let them," Elena said, without looking up. "Sip lived through worse." She stood and crossed to the window. From here she could almost see the coal industries building, glass and steel, gleaming like nothing could touch it. Once, she might have believed that. Now she knew better. "This isn't just about Harlan," she said. "It's about every person Adrian thought he could step on and walk away from. It's about the fact that he believed people like me, people without money, without a name, down matter." Mia Sip's voice softened. "And Daniel." Elena turned then, meeting her gaze. "Everything I've done, every choice I've made, has been about him. This case, it's not just justice. It's the proof that he's grow up, knowing no one, not even his father, can take away what we built." Flashback, 1 year ago. Elena in her office, diploma framed on the wall, Daniel in the corner building Lego towers. Her first major case had just closed in victory. A news site ran the headline, "Young attorney dismantles fortune, 500 defense in landmark case." Daniel had asked, "Does this mean we see her rich now?" She laughed. "Not yet. But it means we are safe." Present day again. The prep session stretched into evening. Every witness statement was dissected, every exhibit scrutinized. Adrian's lawyers would try to paint her as reckless, vengeful, untrustworthy. She would let them. And then she would turn it into her advantage. Her phone buzzed, Daniel's sitter texting to say he'd fallen asleep early. She stared at the message for a moment, then slid the phone aside. Mia gathered her papers. "You sit ready for tomorrow." Elena Sip's smile was faint, but it reached her eyes. "I've been ready for years." I believed her, because I'd seen the distance she'd traveled, not just from that apartment to this conference room, but from a woman abandoned to a woman who could walk into court and stare down the man who left her, knowing she had already survived him once. And this time survival wouldn't be enough. This time she intended to win. The boardroom at Coal Industries had always been Adrian's territory. Long glass table, leather chairs, a panoramic view of the city, a space built for dominance. But that morning, it didn't feel like his, it felt like a war council. The partners were tense, each with a legal pad and a stack of files in front of them. The overhead lights reflected off the polished surface of the table, making everything look sharper, colder. "Whitmore," the general counsel, started the briefing. "Elena Torres' filings are aggressive. She sits framing Harlan as a whistleblower hero and you as the architect of a long-running fraud. The motion to unseal communications will be heard next week. If she wins that—" "She won't," Adrian cut in. His voice was flat, but there was an edge beneath it. Whitmore didn't argue, but his eyes said otherwise. "She sits leveraging her personal connection to you," said Dawson, the head of PR. "Even if she doesn't say it outright, the press will sniff it out. They to love the former lover turned adversary angle." Sophie, seated at the far end of the table, stiffened. Her ring caught the light as she crossed her arms. "So that's what this is really about. Some ex trying to get revenge." Adrian Sip's gaze flicked to her. "It's about her trying to destroy my company." "Same thing," Sophie muttered. The conversation circled strategy. Motions to delay, attempts to discredit Harlan, planting doubts about Elena's motives. Then Adrian leaned forward, both palms flat on the table. We set her not just defending. We set her going on offense. I want everything on her: financial records, academic history, every job she sits ever held. I want to know who she sits dated, who she sits sued, and who hates her enough to talk. Whitmore hesitated. That could backfire. If it looks like a smear. It's not a smear if it's the truth, Adrian snapped. Sophie's voice cut in. I see. What exactly are you hoping to find? That she's a bad mother? That she lied about something 10 years ago? That she doesn't pay her parking tickets? Because right now, Adrian, the only thing the press will see is you, powerful billionaire, trying to crush a single mom. Her words hung in the air. Adrian Sipp's jaw worked, but he didn't respond to her. Instead, he looked back to Whitmore. Do it quietly. I want leverage before we sip her in that courtroom. When the meeting broke, Sophie lingered. I could see her knuckles white around her clutch. Your sister making this personal, she said. It is personal, Adrian replied. She studied him because of the case, or because of her. Adrian didn't answer right away. His eyes drifted toward the skyline. But I knew he wasn't seeing it. He was seeing something else, something older. She's not the person you think she is, he said finally. Sophie Sipp's tone sharpened. Then why does it sound like you, Sipp, trying to convince yourself of that? Later, in his office, Adrian sat alone with the research his investigators had sent over. It was meticulous, school records showing Elena graduated near the top of her class, despite working full-time, employment history that revealed she'd clerked for two of the most demanding judges in the state, pro bono cases defending tenants against illegal evictions. Nothing scandalous, nothing useful, except one folder. Inside were photos from the years he hadn't seen her. Grainy shots of Elena walking Daniel to school, carrying a briefcase in one hand and his backpack in the other. A Christmas parade where she stood on the curb, scarf wrapped tight, laughing at something Daniel had said. Adrian stared at them for a long time. She looked happy, not wealthy, not comfortable, but solid. A woman who'd built a life brick by brick without him. He closed the folder and poured himself a drink. That night, Sophie confronted him at home. Tell me the truth, she said, standing in the doorway of his study. Was she pregnant when you left her? Adrian froze. You think I don't hear the whispers? Sophie went on. People talk, Adrian. They've been talking since the wedding. She didn't tell me, Adrian said finally. That's not an answer. She didn't tell me, he repeated. Louder now. I didn't know about the boy until last week. Sophie blinked. And now? Adrian Sipp's fingers tightened around his glass. Now I know he sips mine. The silence that followed was thick. And you still think you can destroy her in court? Sophie asked. The mother of your child. Adrian looked away. If she wins, I lose everything. Sophie shook her head. Maybe you already did. From my position in this story's shadows, I could feel the shift again. The boardroom battle lines had been drawn, but they weren't clean. They were tangled up in history and blood, in a boy neither side was willing to give up. This wasn't just a case anymore. It was a collision course, and both of them were accelerating. Adrian had always been good at compartmentalizing. Numbers in one box, emotions in another. Business deals here, personal affairs there. But Daniel didn't fit into any of those boxes. Since the wedding, the boy's face had lodged itself in his mind like a splinter. The tilt of his chin, the way his eyes, the exact shade Adrian saw in the mirror every morning, held a kind of guarded curiosity. It started as distraction. Then it became fixation. And now it was something worse. An ache he couldn't shake. The opportunity came 2 days later. Elena had brought Daniel to a local cafe, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and a blackboard menu. I was there too, half by chance, half because I had started moving in the orbit of this strange collision between past and present. They were in a corner booth, Elena with a laptop open, Daniel with a steaming cup of hot chocolate. He drank it too fast, leaving a faint chocolate ring on the paper lid. When they got up to leave, they forgot the cup. Adrian arrived less than a minute later, not by coincidence. He didn't greet them, didn't even look in their direction as they passed in the doorway. But when they were gone, his hand closed around the cup like it was evidence in a case no one else knew existed. The lab didn't ask questions. Money made sure of that. 3 days later, a courier delivered a sealed envelope to Adrian's penthouse. He didn't open it right away. The weight of it felt heavier than paper should. He poured himself a drink, let the ice sweat into the amber liquid, and stared at the envelope on the desk. Finally, he broke the seal. Probability of paternity, 99.97%. He read the line twice, then again. Daniel was his son. The rush of emotions wasn't clean or noble. It was messy, shock-laced with guilt. Guilt tangled with something dangerously close to pride. He had a son. A son he'd never met properly. A son who'd grown up without him. A son Elena had kept from him. That night, he found himself outside their apartment building. He didn't go in, didn't even get out of the car. He just watched from the driver's seat as lights came on in a third-floor window. Through the curtain, he saw movement. A woman's silhouette, Elena, crossing the room. Then a smaller figure, bounding toward her, arms outstretched. She scooped Daniel up without hesitation, pressing her face into his hair. The moment was so ordinary, so private, Adrian almost looked away, but he didn't. He stayed there, staring, the glass between them turning the scene into something he could observe but not touch. The next morning, he brought the results to Whitmore. "This changes everything," Adrian said, dropping the folder on the table. Whitmore opened it, scanned the page, then looked up sharply. "You had this done without consent?" Adrian ignored the question. "She's been hiding him from me for years. This gives us leverage. Or it gives her motive," Whitmore countered. "The jury hears you abandoned her pregnant, and suddenly she sits the sympathetic figure. You want to win the case, Adrian, not hand her the moral high ground." Adrian Sip's eyes narrowed. "We don't tell the jury, not yet. We use it to force her into a settlement. She doesn't want her son dragged into this mess any more than I do." Whitmore leaned back. "You assuming she doesn't already know you know." Adrian stilled. "What are you talking about?" Whitmore shrugged. "She's smart. Smarter than most. If you got the results, she probably figured you try something like this. And if she not reacting, that's because she already decided how to use it against you." That thought stuck with him. The next time Adrian saw Elena in the courthouse hallway before a preliminary hearing, she didn't look rattled. She didn't even look surprised. She glanced at him the way a chess player studies the board before making a move she'd planned 10 turns ago. "Nice tie," she said, brushing past him. It wasn't a compliment. It was a warning. That night, in his penthouse, Adrian sat alone in the dark with the DNA results on the desk in front of him. He could almost hear her voice from years ago, angry, soft, full of betrayal. "You didn't stay." He told himself he could use this, that it was a weapon, that knowing Daniel was his son gave him the upper hand. But deep down, he knew the truth. It was also his weakness. The first day of trial smelled like polished wood, old paper and tension. Federal courtroom 6B was packed, press in the back row, cameras banned but their presence palpable. The jury filed in slowly, eyes scanning the room, already weighing the faces they'd be watching for weeks. Adrian sat at the defense table, in a navy suit, jaw tight. Across from him, Elena in a dark green sheath dress that was as deliberate as her opening statement. She didn't look at him, not once. When the judge called for opening arguments, she rose, smooth and unhurried. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, her voice steady, "this case is about truth, about what happens when a corporation decides it is above the law, about the people who suffer in silence because they believe they can fight back until someone does." She moved toward them, not pacing, but advancing like she belonged in their space. Over the next several days, you will see documents, memos stamped confidential, in which Cole Industries executives, under the direction of Mr. Adrian Cole, authorized payments to conceal safety violations, falsified revenue reports to inflate stock value, and paid bribes to secure contracts. You will see the trail, you will follow the money, and you will see the truth. Adrian didn't quite flinch, but his pen stopped moving. Elena's tone softened, almost conversational. My client, Mr. Harlan, didn't want this fight. He worked for Cole Industries for 15 years. He believed in the company. But when he saw what was happening, when he realized lives were being risked so that a few men could line their pockets, he knew silence was no longer an option. She stepped back, hands clasped loosely. We are here because power without accountability is dangerous, and no one is above the law. When she sat down, the jury-sip's eyes followed her. Whitmore stood for the defense. His voice was measured, practiced. You will hear a story from Miss Torres that sounds compelling, he began. But stories are not facts. The truth is that Cole Industries is a respected leader in its field, employing thousands, contributing millions to the economy. The truth is that this case is built on the word of a disgruntled employee with an axe to grind and a lawyer with a personal history involving my client. At the words personal history, Elena didn't blink. She waited. By mid-afternoon, the first exhibits were entered, emails from Adrian's senior staff discussing adjustments to safety inspection results. Elena walked the jury through them, date by date, connecting each to payments made to keep regulators quiet. Would you read the highlighted section, please? She asked a former compliance officer on the stand. The woman cleared her throat. The scene: we cannot risk another delay in production. Approve the payment and close the file. Elena glanced at the jury, letting the words hang before asking, and who was copied on this email? Mr. Adrian Cole. She didn't look at Adrian, but the jury did. The next day, the defense struck back. Whitmore called a witness who spoke about Elena's early years, working as a waitress, struggling to finish law school, raising a child alone. He hinted at financial instability, implying desperation might motivate her tactics. When it was her turn to cross-examine, Elena didn't dodge it. Yes, she said, meeting the jury-sept's gaze. I worked 2 jobs while in law school. I raised my son without financial support. I studied for exams on my lunch breaks. That is not a weakness. That is the reason I am here today. She moved closer to the witness stand. When you had to fight for every inch of ground you stand on, you learn not to back down from people who think they can take it away. That is what this case is about. The jury was rapt. I watched Adrian then, not the CEO in the press photos, but the man sitting rigid in a courtroom while the woman he once left dismantled his defenses, one exhibit at a time. There was something in his eyes I couldn't quite name. Resentment, yes, but also a flicker of something else. Admiration, maybe, or recognition. By the end of the first week, the momentum was hers. Every document she introduced felt like a stone laid on the foundation of her argument. Every witness she questioned seemed to reinforce her version of events. The press outside called it David v. Goliath. Inside, it was something more personal. Every time Adrian looked at her, I could see the war happening behind his eyes, the fight between the instinct to destroy her and the pull towards something he hadn't let himself feel in years. And Elena? She never looked back. The courthouse at night is a different animal. The echo of footsteps down empty marble halls, the faint hum of vending machines, the scent of stale coffee drifting from abandoned conference rooms. It was just after 9 when I saw Adrian leaning against the wall outside Elena's temporary office, suit jacket slung over one arm. She emerged moments later, a file in her hand, the exhaustion in her shoulders hidden beneath practiced poise. Elena, he said. She stopped, keys in her hand, but didn't turn fully toward him. You not supposed to be here. He stepped forward. I need to talk to you, alone. Her eyes flicked down the hallway. The clerk locking up gave them both a curious glance before disappearing through the stairwell door. 5 minutes, she said finally. They ended up in one of the smaller mediation rooms, fluorescent light, round table, 2 chairs. Adrian closed the door behind them, but didn't sit. "As in not here to fight," he began. "That's a first," she said, dropping her bag on the table. He let the comment slide. "I'm offering you a settlement, 7 figures, up front. No appeals, no press." And he hesitated, as though the next part was harder to say. Shared custody of Daniel. Her head tilted slightly. "That sip's generous. Almost sounds like a confession." "I stand not confessing to anything," he said sharply. "I stand trying to end this before it gets worse, for both of us." She leaned back in her chair, studying him. "For both of us, or for you?" Adrian exhaled through his nose. "You think I don't downstead care about him? About my son?" She didn't answer right away. Her eyes searched his face like she was looking for a crack in the armor. "If you cared about him, you would have cared about me, back then, when it mattered." His jaw tightened. "I didn't no." "You didn't ask," she cut in, voice low but sharp. "You built a life where I didn't exist, and now suddenly you want a place in his." He stepped closer, palms on the table. "Yes, I do. And I step willing to make this easy for you. Take the money, take the agreement. We both walk away." She smiled then, but it wasn't sit warm. "You still think this is about money?" The silence stretched between them, heavy. Finally she spoke. "This isn't about a payout. It's about the truth, about showing the world exactly who you are and what you done. For Harlan, for the people your company hurt. And yes, for me." Adrian straightened, his eyes hardening. "You think destroying me will fix what happened?" Her gaze didn't waver. "No, but it will make sure you can do it to anyone else." He looked away, jaw flexing. "And Daniel, you willing to drag his father through the mud in public?" "You did that yourself," she said, "long before he was born." I watched his shoulders drop slightly then, as though some last piece of hope had slipped out of reach. "Elena, tomorrow, once the verdict is read, there's no going back. Whatever happens, it'll be permanent." She picked up her bag. "That's the point." He moved aside as she headed for the door. At the threshold, she paused and glanced back at him. "After tomorrow, the world will know who you truly are, and you'll have to live with it." She didn't wait for his reply. The door shut softly behind her, leaving Adrian alone in the hum of the fluorescent lights, staring at the empty chair across from him. The air in the courtroom was heavy, the kind that makes every breath feel measured. The jury had been out for nearly 8 hours. Outside, the press clustered like vultures on the courthouse steps. Inside, Adrian sat at the defense table, one hand gripping the armrest, the other clenched in his lap. Elena stood a few feet away, papers stacked neatly before her, but she wasn't reading them. She was still, composed, eyes fixed on the door the jurors would walk through. When the bailiff's voice rang out, "All rise," the room stood as one. The jury filed in, faces unreadable. The foreperson handed the verdict form to the clerk, who passed it to the judge. The judge scanned it, then looked up. "In the matter of Harlan vs. Coal Industries," the judge began, "we, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff." A breathless murmur rippled through the gallery. "We award damages in the amount of $125 million. For a moment, the room was soundless. Then the noise came. Gasps, whispered curses, the scratch of reporters' pens. Adrian's grip on the armrest loosened, but not in relief. His eyes moved to Elena. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply closed her file and turned to shake Harlan's hand. Whitmore leaned toward Adrian. "We can appeal." "No," Adrian said quietly. His gaze was still locked on her. "Because it wasn't the number that hurt. It was the fact that she had done exactly what she promised, shown the world who he really was." The judge dismissed the jury. The gavel struck. People began to stand, to gather their things, to spill out into the hallway where cameras were waiting. Adrian rose slowly, buttoning his jacket. Across the aisle, Elena bent down, speaking to Daniel. The boy reached for her hand. For one small moment, Adrian thought Daniel might look at him. He didn't stay. They walked out together, mother and son, into the corridor's chaos. I followed behind, watching the scene through the lens of someone who had seen every step of this battle. The press surged forward, microphones thrust out, voices overlapping. Miss Torres, how does it feel to win? Mr. Cole, will you resign? Is this the end for coal industries? Elena's answer was simple. Today is about accountability. She didn't stop walking. Adrian didn't answer any questions. His silence was its own statement. Months later, winter had given way to spring. The city was soft with new leaves and the scent of wet pavement after rain. I spotted Elena and Daniel in the park near the Langford Hotel, the same place where it all began. The fountain was still there, its water catching the afternoon light. Daniel leaned over the edge, tossing a coin in with the unself-conscious joy only children have. Elena stood a few steps back, watching him. I walked closer, close enough to hear when Daniel ran up to her. I wished for a dog, he announced. She laughed softly, brushing his hair from his eyes. They sat together on the fountain's edge. Daniel's feet swung above the stone, his head resting lightly against her arm. There was no tension in her posture now, no trace of the courtroom steel, just a quiet ease, as if she'd finally set down a weight she'd been carrying for years. She looked around the park once, almost as if remembering that first night, how Adrian had knelt beside Daniel here without knowing who he was. I wondered if she thought about Adrian much now, if she ever replayed the moment she walked away from him in that hallway after the verdict. Probably not. Her life had moved forward, away from the shadow he had cast. Daniel pointed at the fountain. You should make a wish too, Mom. She smiled. Not the smile of someone who'd won, but the smile of someone who had survived and found peace on the other side. I don't need to, she said. I already have what I wished for. They stayed there until the sun dipped lower, the water catching the last streaks of gold. Then they stood hand in hand and walked away. Neither of them looked back.